Montana Territory, spring of 1883. The wind howled across the empty plains as if it remembered every broken promise ever made. Vera Rosewood stood at the edge of her porch, her hands dusted with flour, and her gray-flecked braid tucked tight under her scarf. The land stretched wide in all directions, lonely and brown after a hard winter. Her house, a simple two-room homestead built with her late husband's hands, leaned a little from years of weather. She squinted westward, trying to make out the rider moving slow along the ridge. He was the first stranger she had seen in weeks. "Ma!" came a small voice from inside. "The bread is burning." Vera turned fast, sweeping back inside. Her daughter, Fern, stood on a stool by the table, eyes wide. She was 11, thin, and too quiet for a child. Her little brother, Flynn, only 5, sat curled by the hearth with one of the dogs, coughing softly into a quilt. Vera grabbed the blackened loaf with a sigh. "It will still eat," she said, setting it to cool. They had not had visitors in months. Since her husband died of fever last spring, no one came around much. She was 42, too old to catch the eye of any man around these parts, not that she was looking. The land needed her. Her children needed her. And her heart had already been broken once. But when she stepped back outside, the rider had stopped at the edge of her yard. He dismounted slow, careful. Dust clung to his coat and hat, and his horse looked near worn out. He was not young, maybe in his mid-30s, but he had the kind of stillness that made you look twice. He took off his hat, brushed a hand through thick dark hair, and nodded once. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and even. "I hate to trouble you, but my horse is done and I have not eaten since yesterday." Vera studied him a moment. She did not move. "You law?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just passing through. Name's Isaiah Lorne." She hesitated. Then, finally, she opened the gate. "Well, Isaiah Lorne, we got burnt bread and weak coffee. If that suits you, come in." He gave a tired smile and followed her inside. By the time the sun slid behind the hills, Isaiah had fed and watered his horse, helped carry wood, and read from Vera's old Bible to Flynn, who had taken to him instantly. Fern watched him like a hawk, her small arms folded, as if daring him to hurt them. That night, after the children were asleep, Vera poured Isaiah a tin cup of coffee and sat across from him at the table. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. "You got family?" she asked finally. "Had a sister," he said. "She married and moved east. I never did settle. Been working cattle, driving freight, whatever I can find. Lately. Just looking for someplace quiet." She nodded, understanding more than he said. "You look younger than you talk." He looked at her then. Really looked. "And you look stronger than any woman I ever met." She blinked, not sure how to respond. No one had said anything like that to her in a long time. Outside, the wind settled down. The fire popped. And for a moment, the quiet held something soft between them. Isaiah stayed the next day. Helped fix the fence where the last storm had torn it down. Carried water from the creek. Talked to Fern with patience until she finally asked him if he had ever ridden a buffalo. He laughed and told her no, but he once saw a man try. By the third day, Vera caught herself watching him when he was not looking. He was kind with the children, gentle with the animals, and he moved through the house like he had always been part of it. But she reminded herself he was only passing through. Men like him did not stay. And women like her did not get second chances. But Isaiah was not in a hurry to leave. One morning, as Vera stitched an old shirt by the window, she asked, "You ever think of settling?" Isaiah looked up from where he sat whittling by the fire. "Every day lately." She set the shirt down. "You could stay through spring. There is work here." He met her eyes. "I would like that." On the 10th day, a man rode up. Vera knew him. Wallace Dean. Local rancher. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always sneering. He had come sniffing around last fall, but Vera had sent him off. This time, he was not alone. 2 hands rode behind him. You sheltering a drifter? Wallace asked, looking straight at Isaiah. Isaiah stepped forward slow. I am not causing trouble. Wallace spat. You are trouble just breathing near her. Ain't right. She is a widow, and she has got 2 mouths to feed. Folks around here talk. Vera stepped between them. Let them talk. Wallace's eyes narrowed. You think this man is going to save you? He will leave. They all do. Isaiah's voice was quiet. I am not him. Wallace turned his horse and rode off. Dust rose behind them, but Isaiah did not move. Vera stood beside him, hands clenched. He will be back. Isaiah looked at her. Then I will still be here. That night, Vera found herself outside by the corral, staring at the stars. Isaiah came up beside her, his coat wrapped tight, his face half in shadow. You afraid? He asked. Not of him, she said. What then? She hesitated. Of hoping. Isaiah stepped closer. I do not see anything wrong with hope. She looked at him then, really looked. You are 10 years younger than me. He smiled. And you are the most beautiful woman I have ever met. She stared at him, breath caught. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. I mean it, Vera Rosewood. Her eyes filled, and she did not look away. Do not lie to me. I never have, he said. And I never will. She leaned in, just a little. He met her halfway. Their first kiss was quiet, slow, and full of things either of them said aloud. But it said enough. She was not too old. Not to him. And her beauty had never faded. He saw it clearer than anyone ever had. The next morning came with a hard frost, silvering the prairie grass and edging the window panes in lace. Vera wrapped Flynn in a wool shawl before stepping outside. Isaiah was already by the barn, brushing down the mare with slow, even strokes. She noticed how he talked to the horse under his breath, like it was a partner in conversation. It wasn't the kind of thing a man did to be seen, it was just who he was. She crossed the yard, arms folded against the cold. You planning on riding out today? Isaiah didn't look up right away. No, ma'am. Not unless you want me gone. I would have packed your food if I did. That earned the smallest lift of his brow. Then I reckon I've got more fence to mend. Vera didn't answer. She just turned back toward the house, but not before he saw the faintest lift at the corner of her mouth. Later that afternoon, Fern stood at the stove stirring a pot of beans while Vera patched a hole in Flynn's trousers. The boy lay curled on the rug, tracing shapes into the ash dust with a stick. Isaiah came in from the cold, bringing with him the smell of snow-soaked leather. I passed a broken wheel a ways down the trail, he said. Looks like someone lost their wagon axle. Vera looked up. Any sign of who it belonged to? Tracks headed west. Small feet, too. Might be a woman and a child. Fern set the spoon down. What if they need help? I'll ride out after supper, Isaiah said. Won't go far. Just enough to be sure no one's freezing out there. Vera nodded once, and he was already pouring water into the washbasin. That night, after he left, the wind picked up again, louder than it had been in days. Vera sat by the fire, needle paused mid-stitch. Her eyes kept flicking to the door, then to the clock, though she told herself not to worry. When boots finally thudded against the porch, she was already standing. Isaiah stepped inside, snow in his beard, and something quiet in his eyes. They were camped near the river fork, he said. Young woman, maybe 20. Boy couldn't be more than 3. She was trying to walk him to Bozeman. She's out of her mind, Vera said, setting a blanket over Flynn. She's desperate, Isaiah replied. Said her husband died in a mining collapse and she sold what little they had for a wagon that didn't hold. I told her to come back with me, but she wouldn't. Vera pulled her shawl tighter. You left her out there? No. I gave her my coat and half the bed you packed for me. Told her if she turned back after sunup, she'd find this place. Vera stepped closer, eyes locked on his. You think she'll come? I think she's got enough fire to make it. But I figured you had the right to say yes or no. Vera didn't hesitate. If she shows up, she stays till spring. Isaiah nodded. That's what I told her. They didn't say more about it. Instead, Vera poured him hot water for washing, and he took it with a quiet thank you that held more meaning than the words themselves. The next day came heavy with snow. It fell in thick, slow flakes that muffled sound and softened the harsh edges of the world. Isaiah spent the morning inside, whittling a wooden bird for Flynn, who stared with solemn awe as the shape took form. Fern finally sat beside them, close but not touching. Did you have a mama? Isaiah didn't stop carving. I did. She died in the blizzard of '72. We were in Kansas then. Fern didn't ask more, and he didn't volunteer. That evening, just as the light began to fade into the pale gray of snow-cloud dusk, a knock came at the door, barely more than a scrape. Vera opened it to find the young woman Isaiah had spoken of, clutching her boy in one arm and the reins of a tired mule in the other. Her cheeks were wind-burned, eyes hollow with worry, but she stood straight. I'm Clara, she said. This is Eli. If you meant what was offered. Vera stepped aside. Come in. Isaiah took the child, setting him by the fire, while Fern fetched a quilt. Vera handed Clara a tin of warm broth, and for a long time, no one said anything. They didn't need to. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Vera found Isaiah sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, his face turned toward the dark. She stepped beside him, watching the snow drift down. You made a choice, she said softly. She reminded me of someone. Who? He didn't answer right away. Then, my mother. She used to say a person's worth isn't measured by what they stand to gain, but what they're willing to give without promise. Vera sat beside him, her hand brushing his through the wool. Then she raised you right. He looked at her, and something shifted in his eyes, something deeper than gratitude or admiration. Something rooted. I've been many places, Vera. Seen a lot of faces. But this quiet, this firelight, your voice when you tell Fern to mind her manners. It's the first time I felt like I stopped running. The weight of his words settled between them. She didn't need to answer. She simply leaned into him. And this time, he leaned back. The snow held until mid-March, hard-crusted and slow to melt. The days lengthened by the inch, and though the wind still bit, the cold no longer pressed against the bones the way it had. Vera kept busy with sewing and tending the garden beds that lay waiting beneath the thaw. Isaiah worked the fence lines and split logs from the cottonwood that had come down back in January. Clara helped where she could, her boy Eli often in tow, but she moved like someone used to being watched too closely, and spoke little unless spoken to. One morning, as Vera poured lye into the soap kettle, she caught sight of Isaiah and Fern out by the chicken coop. Fern handed him a cracked egg and pointed to something in the straw. He crouched beside her, listening, his head bent to hers like they were equals. Vera looked away before he turned. Later, she found him washing his hands at the pump, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms streaked with dirt. You've a way with her, she said, handing him a towel. She don't open easy. She's got her reasons, he replied. She's not afraid, just careful. Vera leaned on the post. She talks about you when she thinks I'm not listening. He dried his hands, folded the towel slow. And what does she say? That your boots are too big and you don't eat enough. And that you never talk about where you've been. He glanced down, then out toward the edge of the property, where the hills were beginning to show bare patches. I've been places worth forgetting. Vera didn't press. Instead, she picked up the basket of soap molds and started toward the house. Papers in the drawer by the stove. If you ever want to write someone. I haven't got anyone left to write. She paused. Then write for yourself. That evening, Isaiah sat at the table while Fern read aloud from one of the old dime novels Vera kept tucked high on the shelf. Clara mended a sleeve, her needle flashing in the firelight, and Eli dozed with his head against Flynn's shoulder. Vera brought Isaiah a mug of water, and he looked up with a question in his eyes. "Would you want me here after thaw?" he asked, voice low. She sat beside him. "You're already here." "That's not the same." "No," she said. "It isn't." He didn't push her. Just nodded once and set the mug down. 3 days later, Wallace Dean came again, this time on foot. His hat was in his hand and his coat soaked through from the creek crossing. Fern spotted him first and ran to the barn to fetch Isaiah. By the time Vera stepped outside, Wallace was already halfway up the path. "Came to talk," he said. "Not to start anything." Isaiah stood behind Vera, still as ever. Wallace's gaze flicked to him, then back. "Folks up near Gallatin say you've got runaways housed here. Talk's stirring. Some don't like the idea of strange men and women nesting under the same roof." "You know how people are." "I know how you are," Vera said. He didn't flinch. "I came to say this ain't my business anymore. I've got a woman in Ennis now. She don't mind the way I speak. Maybe I came looking because I was lonely. Maybe I blamed you for not being the one to fix that." Vera folded her arms. "Then say your piece and go." Wallace glanced at Isaiah again. "You're not like the rest of us. You stay out of trouble here?" "I don't answer to you," Isaiah said, his voice calm. Wallace gave a half nod, turned, and walked back the way he came. That night Isaiah didn't speak much. He sat beside Vera on the porch, his hands curled around a tin mug, steam rising into the starlight. She reached for his sleeve, her fingers brushing the edge of his wrist. "You didn't need to stand behind me," she said. "I wasn't standing behind you," he answered. "I was standing with you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "There's a difference, isn't there?" "There is." The next morning, Clara came in from the barn with her cheeks flushed and her eyes wide. "There's a trader at the creek bend," she said. "Said he's headed west, but he's got fabric and seed potatoes." Vera pulled on her shawl and stepped out with Isaiah. They made their way down to the creek where a mule cart sat nestled beneath the cottonwoods. The trader was old, with a limp and a kind way of speaking. Vera traded eggs and dried apples for a bolt of blue calico and a sack of tubers. Isaiah handed over his pocket knife for a spool of strong thread, and the man tipped his hat in thanks. As they walked back, Vera carried the fabric wrapped under her arm. "You planning to sew?" she teased. "I was thinking Fern might. She'll want to. She's got a steady hand." He stopped walking, the wind lifting the edge of his coat. "Would you wear something made from it?" She looked at him, surprised. "It's not for work," he said. "It's just something pretty." Her throat tightened. "I'd wear it to church," she said softly. "If I had a reason to go." He stepped forward, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "Maybe I'll give you one." She didn't move away. Spring crept in slow, but it came. The ground softened, the river swelled, and the air sweetened with the smell of damp earth and thawed pine. Vera planted early peas with Flynn, while Fern hauled water with steady arms. Clara found work in town helping an older woman with her washing, and Eli began to laugh more than he cried. One evening, Vera came in from the field to find Isaiah building a frame near the edge of the barn. She watched from the path, the sun warm on her shoulders. "What's that?" "Chicken run," he said. "Eli said he wanted to help feed them. Figured they need more space." She stepped closer. "You building it like you'll still be here come fall?" He straightened, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I'm building it like this is my place now." She walked the rest of the way to him. "You sure?" "I'm not running anymore," he said. "And I'm not waiting for someone to tell me I'm allowed to stay." She touched his chest, just once, above his heart. "You're allowed?" That night, after the children were fed and the lanterns trimmed low, Vera lit a candle in the front room and laid out the blue calico on the table. Fern brought her the shears without being asked. Isaiah stood in the doorway, watching as she measured the fabric, his eyes steady and warm. "You making it for Sunday?" he asked. Vera looked up. No, she said. I'm making it for the morning after. The first Sunday after the thaw, Vera wore the calico dress. She hadn't meant to. She'd laid it out to air by the window, meaning to save it. But the morning light hit it just so, soft across the bodice she'd shaped by hand, and something in her shifted. She dressed without hurrying, tying her hair back with a ribbon Fern had tucked into her apron pocket when she thought no one was looking. Isaiah was outside loading a crate of salted pork into the wagon when she stepped onto the porch. He straightened slowly. His eyes moved over her, and for a long moment he didn't speak. You look like the first lilac bloom, he said finally. I feel like a woman with new boots, she said, smoothing the skirt. Unsure if I'm standing right. Isaiah stepped closer and offered his hand. You're standing just fine. They drove into town together for the first time. Clara stayed back with the children, promising to keep the stew from boiling over. The wagon creaked steady under them, wheels catching in thaw softened ruts. The sky was pale blue, cloudless, and the cottonwoods were beginning to bud. Vera hadn't been to Sunday gatherings since before Owen died. She'd not wanted the looks, the questions. But as they pulled up near the chapel, Isaiah reached over and adjusted the edge of her shawl, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Inside, the benches were crowded with familiar faces. Some looked twice when Vera entered, her hand resting lightly on Isaiah's arm. But no one said a word. After the hymn, Pastor Wills began reading from the Book of Ruth. Vera glanced sideways at Isaiah when the words fell quiet over the room. Where you go, I will go. As they stepped outside after service, warm sunlight fell across the packed yard. A few neighbors offered subdued greetings. Mrs. Halvorson pressed a jar of preserved apples into Vera's hands, and said nothing more than, You've weathered the winter well. Isaiah helped hitch the horse again, and when they climbed back into the wagon, Vera let the silence settle easy between them. Halfway home, he said, You seem surprised to be welcomed. I'm not used to being seen anymore, she said. You've always been seen, he said. They just didn't know how to look. Later that week, Isaiah brought back a bundle of iron nails and a rough-hewn board from town. He laid it across two sawhorses and carved in silence for the better part of a day. When Vera finally stepped out to bring him water, she saw the letters etched into the grain. Rosewood Lorne. She set the tin cup down beside him. You carving headstones now? He looked up. Name board. For the gate. If that's something you'd want. She traced the letters with one finger. You sure you want your name beside mine? I wouldn't put it anywhere else. She nodded once. Then you better finish it straight. That night, Isaiah brought in a folded scrap of paper and set it on the table. Vera unfolded it and saw his handwriting neat, deliberate, spelling out a list of things they'd need come planting: seed barley, ground lime, spare hinges for the root cellar door. She looked up. You planning ahead? I am. You think we'll have a strong yield this year? I don't know, he said, glancing toward the low burning fire. But I know this land won't turn on you. And neither will I. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his knuckles. Then I guess we'll sew together. In early April, Clara received a letter from her sister in Dakota Territory. There was work in a boarding house and room enough for Eli. Vera offered her a wagon and Isaiah gave her the mule. The morning Clara left, she hugged Vera tight and whispered, You gave me more than shelter. Vera only said, Keep your boots dry. When the wagon pulled away, Fern stood on the porch beside Isaiah, waving until it disappeared over the ridge. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the barn, Vera stood by the gate, watching the wind move through the grass that would soon green. Isaiah came up beside her, the last of the tools still in his hand. You ever think about the years ahead? She asked. I do. You think they'll be kind? He slipped the final nail through the name board and hammered it home. If not, we will be. She looked at him then, really looked. There was no hesitation left in her. Come inside, she said. It's time you had a room that's yours. He followed her through the door and closed it behind them, and everything in the house settled quiet, sure, and full of promise. The 1st of May brought a gentle rain, steady and soaking, the kind that softened the stubborn earth after a long freeze. Vera stood just inside the barn door, watching the drops beat along the eaves and fall in rhythm on the empty trough below. Isaiah was behind her, oiling the harness straps laid over a rail, his hands moving slow and sure. "I meant to ask," Vera said, her voice quiet against the rain. "Do you want to bring a preacher out here or wait until we can get into town again?" Isaiah didn't turn from his work. "That depends. You wanting the kind of vows a man says in front of a crowd, or the kind he keeps every morning without needing to be reminded?" She leaned her shoulder against the frame, the scent of wet hay thick in the air. "Owen and I were married by a circuit rider who showed up half a day late and spilled coffee on the registry. Nobody remembered his name. He died that winter." Isaiah set the harness down and wiped his hands on a rag, then came to stand beside her. "Then maybe we don't wait on a man with a book to tell us what we already know." Vera looked at him. "I'd like that. But I want Fern and Flynn there, when we say it." "You'll have them." She reached for his hand, warm despite the damp. His fingers closed around hers, and neither of them spoke for a long time. 3 days later, when the sun returned and the fields dried enough to walk without sinking, they stood together behind the house, with Fern holding the Bible and Flynn gripping a flower he'd found near the creek. The boy didn't understand what they were saying, not quite, but he smiled when Isaiah knelt and promised to be his pa, if he'd have him. Flynn nodded and tucked the flower into Isaiah's shirt pocket. Fern read a passage at Vera's request, her voice steady. When she finished, she looked up at Isaiah and asked, "Are you going to keep your boots by the door now?" Isaiah bent slightly, meeting her eyes. "If your ma says I can," Vera answered by slipping her hand into his. "They're already there." No one clapped. There was no music. Only the wind in the grass and the rustle of birds settling along the fence. But Vera felt the moment settle deep inside her, quiet and sure. That evening, she cooked the last of the dried apples into a cobbler, and Fern lit the lantern early. Flynn fell asleep with his head in Isaiah's lap, and Vera sat with her sewing untouched, watching the fire. "You ever think about bringing in more stock?" Isaiah asked, his voice low so as not to wake the boy. "There's talk of a cattle drive passing through in July," Vera said. "Might be a chance to trade for a calf or two. I could ride with them, just part way." She shook her head. "You don't need to prove anything." "I know. But I'd like to be useful." "You already are." A week later, a letter came addressed to Clara. Vera rode into town with Fern and handed it off at the post. On the way back, they passed the schoolhouse, newly painted and standing straighter than it had last fall. "They're hiring a second teacher come autumn," Fern said, not looking at her mother. "Miss Ellingwood told me." "You thinking about applying?" "I'm not old enough yet. But I could help." She said I read better than some of the older boys. Vera smiled. "You always did mind the shape of words." They reached home just as Isaiah was finishing a new bench he'd built along the front porch. He wiped sawdust from his sleeves and helped Fern down from the wagon without being asked. That night, as they sat watching the last of the light fade behind the hills, Vera leaned her head against Isaiah's shoulder. "I used to think I'd always be waiting," she said. "For something to go wrong. For someone to leave." Isaiah didn't answer right away. Then, "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere." She turned to look at him, the lines of his face softer in the dusk. "Do you still?" He met her gaze. "I belong here. With you. With them." She reached for his hand, their fingers threading together without effort. "Then we're settled." Years passed, slow and full. Vera taught Flynn to ride along the fence line, and Isaiah built a new shed for feed. Fern left at 17 to work at the schoolhouse in Bozeman, but returned every summer to help bring in the hay. When a second son came, a quiet boy with eyes like Vera's, Isaiah carved a cradle from pine and placed it beside their bed. They didn't speak of loss anymore, not because they'd forgotten, but because they had found something stronger to hold on to. Each morning, Isaiah rose early to stoke the fire. Vera followed with coffee, and the house filled with the sound of children's feet and the scrape of chairs on wood. The land kept giving, slow and honest, and the seasons passed in rhythm. And every night, before the lamp was turned down, Isaiah would press a kiss to Vera's temple and say, "Still here." And she would answer always, "As long as you are, I will be too."